online, is that right? Right. Okay, so hopefully everyone else can hear me okay. Yeah, welcome to this session about farmer-led research. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Tara Wight. I work for the Landworkers Alliance and I coordinate the agroecological research collaboration. My own background is in research. I'm trained as a research scientist in crop management practices. But now I'm working more in kind of coordinating research networks and campaigning. The agroecology research collaboration is a partnership of 5 different farmer-led organisations. The Landworkers Alliance, the Pasture for Life, the Organic Growers Alliance, CSA and the Ecological Land Cooperative. There's more and more research being done into sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, agroecology, things that could come under the heading of agroecology, and there's huge amounts of money being thrown at that kind of area. And all of our organisations receive overwhelming amounts of requests from people who want to engage in research with farmers, with different people within our networks. So this organisation was set up basically to ensure that research in agroecology is useful and relevant to the agroecological movement, that it's useful for people who are actually farming and growing and trying to build a better food system, and that research which is being done can actually have an impact in the field. We have quite a wide network of academic researchers and farmers who are either researchers themselves or interested in research, who are part of the agroecology research collaboration, and that spread across the UK. But we're still quite young. We've only been around for 2 years, and I've just been with ARC since July. But basically, yes, we're aiming to bring people together, to share ideas, to disseminate research findings to the people who they're relevant to, and to make the connections between agroecological practitioners and researchers in academia. For this session, we're going to focus really primarily on research which is conducted by farmers and growers. My own interest in farmer-led research really came from my PhD work. I was studying a particular crop management practice, and it became really clear to me that farmer knowledge and experience of this topic far exceeded anything in academia. I learned so much more from talking to farmers who were, using this practice in the field, trying it out, than I did from my own 5 years of experiments in the lab, and certainly from the very limited research literature on the topic. And it really started to occur to me, how different our food and land system might look if innovation in the second half of the 20th century had been driven by farmers and growers, rather than by sort of big agribusiness in a very top-down way. And that people who work the land both know and care about the land so much, and the effect that could have if we really prioritise that kind of learning and knowledge and research and experimentation. So that was kind of my own interest in this. And then today for this session, we're going to hear from farmers and growers from different sectors who've conducted research in different ways and through different programmes, or kind of autonomously. And we're also going to hear from Rebecca Swinn, who coordinates Innovative Farmers, as an example of one of these ways which farmer-led research has been carried out. And then we'll discuss some of the benefits and challenges of the farmers conducting research, how the knowledge gained from this can be disseminated, and how this research is, going on to shape our food and farming systems. And then at the end, hopefully, we'll have time for some questions from the audience. So that's enough from me. I'm going to pass over to the panel to introduce themselves. Would you like to start?
Okay, so I'm Camilla, Hayselden-Ashby. My family has a mixed sheep and arable farm down in Kent, just on the edge of the Romney Marsh. And I sort of split my time between working there and also as head of product at Field Margin, which is a farming technology startup. So I have a mixture of sort of applied farming and also speaking to lots of other farmers about what they're doing within their business, and trying to build software which makes it easy for them to record what they're doing, whether that's their day-to-day work or things like trials and research. And I'm currently doing a Nuffield scholarship looking at how to kickstart the UK hemp industry And I've been involved in some of the innovative farmers trials around hemp.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I work for Innovative Farmers. So it's actually a programme managed by the Soil Association, and we have just come up to the end of our 10-year anniversary of the programme. And so that's been a really good chance to celebrate all of the field labs that have happened to date. And everyone here has actually also been involved or is currently involved in a field lab as well. So field labs, I will go on to explain, but it's all about prioritising and supporting farmer-led research. My own background before that was also in certification, and I guess my actual introduction, when I think about it, to farmer-led research was during my master's degree, where I supported farmer florists to compare the carbon emissions from their production systems to those of other production systems abroad, and yeah, so.
Tom Gregory, dairy farmer, Dorset, Devon border. I farm partnership with my wife, and we're share farmers. We farm partnership with another dairy farmer, organic, sort of grazing system, low yielding, as trying to be as sustainable and sort of environmental as possible, with a real interest in sort of finding the paths that we can be more regenerative or sustainable.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosie Begg, and I am one half of Gallgate Farm. My husband's there, and I'm predominantly a blackcurrant grower, and we're also part of the Beck Environment Project, which is a landscape scale nature restoration project, which is in collaboration with other farmers and Angling Water, the council, and numerous other charities. And yeah, we'll talk a bit about sort of the things we're doing in a minute, I think.
Great. Yeah, I think actually you're up next, Rosie, so you can keep going with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is going badly. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So hello everyone again. So our farm is 230 hectares in mid-Norfolk. We're about a third blackcurrants. We also have a small orchard of Victoria plums. A third is in high-level countryside stewardship, and a third is woodland and lakes, part of which is a 50-hectare triple SI, which is older car. We've got grade 3 sandy soil, and I'm going to be talking mainly about our kind of blackcurrant side. So I've been growing blackcurrants for 4 years. The first year was just a sort of learning about how to grow. So I've had 3 years. The first year was our best year on record. The second year was the wettest year on record, and I thought was going to be the worst. And then this year, 2022, was the hottest and driest, and actually was the worst on record. So I've had a kind of snapshot of these real climate extremes over these 3 years I've been in charge. In terms of research, I sort of got back to the farm, having never farmed before, full of enthusiasm and passion, and threw myself into loads of different projects and all of these different sort of startups that might do things. And I think I just wasn't very focused really on what the objectives were, how much time I actually had. And a lot of it was more participation than farmer-led. So didn't prioritise very well with that. Year 2, we got involved with Innovative Farmers, and so there are 30 blackcurrant growers in the UK. And I think across 5 of us, we did looking at our harvesting and how much food wastage there was sort of pre-harvest, as the harvest went through, and post. And that was really interesting because it was my first, I guess, experience of how we could do this over different regions with different growers, different soils, and the evidence being sort of collected in a way that was actually really helpful. I think the next step is, what next? So we now know that we've got a kind of variation of efficiency with our harvesters, but now how do we change and learn from each other? So that's kind of not next. With where we're going now with our research, so this, me holding this blackcurrant in the corner, you can see half of it was cooked with the 40-degree heat. So it was a real sort of moment, and actually above it is the amount that's kind of on the floor. So we lost about 80% of the later varieties, and it was a real moment of, we just can't keep doing this. You know, we've got no business resilience, there's no supply chain resilience, and I've always wanted to see how, or show that humans are part of nature, which is a lot of what was talked about this morning, and we're not sort of food on one side, nature over here, we're all part of it. So this was the real impetus for kind of 2023 and what's next, which is all about soil microbiology and moving away from artificial inputs. So I think a few people here have also done Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web course, and so we're looking at how can we do this just totally differently, how can we focus on the soil, and then it was, so if we do this, how do other people learn from us? What is the best way that we can galvanise bigger change? Because fine if we do it on our farm, but there's 30 other blackcurrant growers, there's a lot of blueberry growers, vineyards, there is a lot of crossover, which these lessons could be really important to them. So it's going to be a complex problem, and we needed some specialist skill sets. So excitingly for 2023, we're working with Soil Ecology Lab, who are over here, and the University of East Anglia, who are going to help provide some sort of rigour and structure to our results and data collection. And then fingers and toes, eyes crossed, I find out today if Ribena are going to help us on this process as well, which would be really exciting. And there we go. So another part of our farming story is the Wendling Beck Environment Project, and it's a big part of the kind of learning culture that we have, my husband and I have kind of with our farm. So we work, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's a collaboration for nature recovery. So we're working with the Nature Conservancy, who are documenting our journey on the farm, how we work together as landowners, how we work with the council, how we work with Anglian Water, and with all these other charities, including the Wildlife Trust, Rivers Trust, Norfolk FWAG, to tackle these really complex issues around climate change and biodiversity. And I think, again, this is interesting in that we're talking about farmer-led research, but actually because of this project, we've had a lot of UEA, the University of East Anglia, which is half an hour away from us, has been coming to the farm to do different master's projects and PhDs, which is, I think it's mainly focused on carbon, above ground and below ground, and water quality. And I think what's interesting with that is that it's kind of strengthened this relationship with a research institution, and the engagement from that has actually really then helped us with what we now want to do with the blackcurrants. So I think there are positives that way as well. And I think finally, I'm not sure, everyone was finishing with a quote, so I was quite pleased that I'd done this on my slides. I love this quote, I have it on the wall, because every day I do something and I probably do it wrong, and you have to pick yourself up and try again and yeah, do better. And I think that really has been part of our research journey, and now being really clear about the objectives, how we kind of can have a domino effect across other growers, other farmers, and share these learnings. And I hope kind of, yeah, this year's the first year where we're really going to do that and prove that we've learnt those lessons. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, Rosie. That was really interesting. Becky's going to talk to us next about
Court. Oh well. So yes. So as I mentioned, the Innovative Farmers Programme has existed for 10 years, and the whole point of it is basically to fill a gap in agricultural R&D, which unfortunately still exists really mostly apart from programmes like this, to be able to support, including financially support, farmers' ideas for research and innovation. Sorry, can I click? Yes. So at the heart of the programme is this concept of field labs. A field lab is essentially a research project involving multiple farms looking at the same, exploring the same research question. And we really encourage our network. Our network is around over 3,000 people. So yeah, we really encourage the network to be feeding ideas for for topics that they would like to explore. And we also host a bunch of events or conferences like this where we want to know what your ideas are for something that you'd like to trial on your own sites as well. So I'll just start from the top left. So as I say, there are on-farm trials, and we are able to provide some funding which groups can apply for in order to support the costs of actually doing the research, and for like some researcher time or their travel or whatever that might be, or for some sampling or lab costs. And we match groups up with researchers and somebody to coordinate the groups, and they are a really essential part of the project, the coordinator, because they're essentially project managing that and making sure everyone's still communicating and feeding back the results so that we're able to also then go on and disseminate them properly. Something that we absolutely prioritise and that we champion is open source findings and results. So everything that comes out of field labs is published on our website, and we have really good networks and links with the farming media and other niche publications as well, to also make sure that field lab results are being shared through those means as well. And also we arrange, as I mentioned, lots of events and workshops where people can also be trained up on things like how to do some soil sampling, or how you should be looking at your above or below ground biodiversity and aspects like that. So it's obviously the core bit is the research, but a lot of it's also the knowledge exchange and just getting farmers together to learn from each other, and often learning a lot more actually from a lot of those conversations than maybe just the research would deliver. So to date, the network has engaged around 12,000 people, and we've awarded, actually, to be honest, well over, more like 500 grand of small grants to groups. And I've just got a few examples. I'd love to talk about all of them, but just a few examples of some recent field labs include looking at trap cropping in potato production and how that can reduce a really common pest, potato cyst nematode. A flagship sort of field lab which is all around adopting a no-till with living mulches system and just really working at the nuts and bolts of how to manage that properly, but also how does that then affect yield and weed growth and that kind of thing. And that work is absolutely ongoing. And just recently, the main research partner there has been able to actually attract some more funding from another private funder to continue that work. So we'll still help with supporting the dissemination of those results as well. Also, even though most field labs are around practices rather than products, they're, of course, tools and tech are really essential in helping people to understand better their growing systems and how their farming practices are affecting, all the different ecological indicators. So, an example of a recent tech field lab was where a group of farmers in the north of England co-designed an on-farm safety app there already existed some sort of on-farm safety apps that would basically notify colleagues if somebody had an accident or something, but they didn't actually work because they relied on GPS signal, and that wasn't really available in sheds. So because there were so many discussions and workshops with actual farmers, who would have guessed, the developer was able to make that work with Wi-Fi signal as well. So just an example of why farm-led research is so important. And also, again, we've looked across all sectors. Alternatives to plastic mulches was a recent one, and also a really good and successful field lab, which now they're really looking for some follow-on funding, which was around challenging existing advice around whether mating sheep grazing on red clover actually affects their fertility, challenging decades-old advice and actually finding that actually including red clover in a mixed sward is actually really beneficial and leads to better fertility rates. So a few tips around successful farmer-led research. Very basic, you all know this. Make sure that you're co-designing the idea and that it's based on people's needs and challenges. Have a really clear research question and a really simple design. Try and really kind of draw it back to a really simple design. What is essential? What does everyone actually really want to know versus what is sort of optional? Agree realistic expectations. Often researchers might have a different idea of what they want to achieve as opposed to farmers or growers. So make sure that you're all on the same page or that you're all getting something out of it. Again, agreeing clear responsibilities. What you don't want is for people, we have seen this in field labs, to be honest, occasionally, where farmers have not realised quite the extent or time that it might take up to go out and do some assessments, rather than having somebody else come and visit and do those themselves. Make sure you consider lots of different risks, particularly weather or staff changes. I'll probably talk about that a bit later. And actually, just something around like meetings and communication. We've generally found that pre-arranging meetings in advance to make sure people are catching up, whether that's quarterly or monthly, whatever's needed for the project, but trying to pre-arrange that rather than constantly, every few months, getting in touch with everyone and doing a doodle poll or something like that and just not hearing back. It's just better to pre-arrange and get that sorted. And of course, be aware of farmer or grower other priorities. So when is best for communication? Is it maybe early mornings or perhaps early evenings? But just be aware and discuss that at the beginning. And yeah, building in time for co-design and reflecting on what did go well, what didn't go well, and what everyone would like to do next. As I say, a lot of field labs have led on to other larger funded projects, and it's such a good way of demonstrating that the need for the research. So yeah. Just a really quick mention that we have so many different projects as well, sort of wider projects that we're linked to. The model of farmer-led innovation is really well recognised at European level, and to be honest, better funded often than in the UK. So there are a few different opportunities you can get involved in. Currently, things around like arable intercropping, look at using interesting satellite monitoring tools to look at sward growth, and various other bits and bobs. So just take down the details. I think it's on the next slide as well, and get in touch if you'd like to be involved in anything. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Yeah, it's great to hear the learnings from a kind of structure that's been going for a long time, actually, facilitating farmer-led research. Tom is going to talk to us now about mob grazing. That's what you're going to talk about, right?
Well, sort of, yeah. So I'm going to talk to you about me and my wife's sort of farming journey and where we started, where we are, and why we changed. And the big question is why? Why do we do what we do? Who's telling us this is the right thing? And actually, who's telling them to tell us that this is the right thing? And if you go even further, why was that research done and who funded it? And is that in our best interest as farmers and growers, as a population, as a country, as a world, as a climate and everything else? So myself and my wife started a dairy enterprise 9 years ago. In our 9th dairy season, we went into partnership with a local dairy farmer who farms 7,500 acres. We're one of 8 dairies, and he's a local, well-known guy who's sort of got a lot of respect in the area. So we chased him down and managed to get him to agree to let us have a go at dairy farming with him. And he runs a very sort of conventional organic dairy system. So we ran this sort of conventional organic dairy system from 2014. We started really sort of collecting data in 2015. And what we were finding, if you take an average line through the middle, we had the drought in 2018, from 2015 to 2019, we weren't really seeing any increase in grass production, even though we were doing what we were told. We were taking advice. We were doing full plough reseeds, break crops, whole crops, wheat crops, and doing different things. But actually, we weren't seeing any improvement in growth. The average growth of a field on a 5 to 7 year reseed policy was 7.5 tonnes. So if I carried on that programme, I would always only ever grow 7.5 tonne of grass. And in a grass-based system, grass growth is a massive driver for profitability. So, what's going on? And then after a few years, we also started to see we were getting more and more soil samples back. These are only just very standard sort of chemical soil samples, but at that point, that was all I knew. It was all I'd been taught. It was all people were telling us about. And we were actually seeing a decline in some of our P&K indices. And so we're organic farmers. We are holier than thou. Why is this not working? I thought we were going to be revolutionising the world and we were doing the great thing. But actually, this isn't necessarily what was happening on our farm. So I started doing some research on maybe actually there's a different way we can start looking at this and start questioning our system on farm. It sort of felt that we were just conventional farmers without using chemicals, which on an organic system that just really doesn't work. You need to be doing things much more complex than just farm with nitrogen, take the nitrogen out, carry on farming. And if you were to design a regenerative farming starter pack, I think in everyone's bag it would have the sort of Gabe Brown book. And there's this I always come back to. He is farm 4, and you can clearly see his figures are outstanding compared to everyone else's. And this is data. This isn't theory. This isn't a research paper done on theoretical knowledge. This is someone went and did some stuff, and they found it worked. So to me, that's farmer-led research. That's what it's all about. This guy's done it, and if he's done it, why can't we do it? So I realised that soil's actually quite complicated, and my GCSE D grade in biology maybe wasn't up to understanding what was going on and why it was going on, or more importantly, why it wasn't working. So we started doing the same as Rosie, the food web course, which I'm still doing now. It's a really good course. It's like a bite-sized introduction to the soil food web, how it works, why it works, and how you can sort of improve it. So we're working on that and starting to understand that there's a lot going on, and it's quite hard to share that knowledge. And my advice is always you just need to go and you need to do that research. Like this course is 80, 100 hours of education. You can't share the knowledge in a 5-minute presentation, but you can hopefully encourage people to go and do the research themselves and gain that knowledge before they can have an opinion on whether you're right or wrong. So we're involved in quite a few pilots and projects. The Arla Regen pilot, run by Arla, 6 farms across 6 countries. So I'm just referring to my wife now, she's an Arla expert. And there's ideally 2 organic, 2 conventional grazers, and 2 house systems. And it's how can regenerative agriculture on an Arla pilot on an Arla dairy farm, what does this look like? So we are the trial farms. The Yo Valley Carbon Project. The next slide the last slide I'll talk more about that one. Innovative farmers. Obviously, we're part of the Innovative Farmers. FIPL grant funding, we farm in an AONB, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, which unlocks funding called Farming in Protective Landscape. So we've had funding for a compost turner, the soil course, and a couple other bits. Cluster groups. This is actually a really good one. We're part of a cluster group called the Marshwood Vale Farmers Cluster Group. And that is 15 maybe farm businesses ranging from 20 to 2,000 acres, dairy, sheep, beef, arable, and everything in between. We've had experts like Niels Caulfield come down and talk to us. Hi, Neil. And talk to us about soil and muck management. And we've had someone come and talk about multi-species lays. For our Christmas social, we talked about owls. And it's just integrating all that knowledge in the Vale and the local experts to try and sort of benefit the local community as much as the farms themselves. And social media, I don't really do social media, but my wife is very good on social media, and so I sort of think that she can share our story, so I don't have to. So some of the trials on farm, top left, this is our mob grazing trial. That's 360 dairy cows in about 3/4 of an acre. As part of our mob grazing trial, we've got, on my farm, we've got two fields, which 2 trial plots, which is one 23-acre field with the tracks straight through the middle. One is a control. We graze this on a 21 to 28 day rotation, standard, 2800 to 1500 residuals, rotational grazing. And then on the other side of the field, which up until this season has been managed exactly the same, we're doing a mob grazing trial. And we've actually got some figures come back from that. When they did the baseline soil analysis, which was chemical, biological and physical, they actually did it a few months after we'd started, and I think it was after 3 or 4 months there was an increase in organic carbon, an increase in organic matter and an increase in fungal to bacterial ratio, and that's just in 4 months of this project. So there was no loss in milk yield and there was a small loss in grass production, but we're very confident we're going to see that back. That loss in grass production I think is an investment in the future. That grass was pushed down into the soil. Bottom left, this is one I'm really interested in. We've got huge stacks of compost all over the farm, and with the FIPL grant funding, we've got a 4 metre wide compost turner coming from Austria. It was meant to be here. That was meant to be my Christmas present, but unfortunately it was delayed due to Italian gearboxes, so I'm told. With Niels, we're going to be running trials on making compost or turning FYM as the base ingredient. Every farmer has FYM and needs a good solution on what to do with it. So we're hoping to use that as the base of a biologically active compost, whether we need to add or inoculate or how we're going to do that. We're going to be running trials on that, and then we'll create the compost and then run a trial on what that looked like after it was applied onto the field. Ecosystems, part of the ALA pilot, we're doing ecosystems through FAI, ecosystem processes, and bottom is we're 100% grass and no-till, so we've been making our own equipment because sort of a lot of specialist equipment is really expensive, so we've bodged together some implements so we can do zero-till, or as close to zero-till as we can get. And then, I don't know if you can see these numbers, but headline figure at the bottom in the middle is tons of CO2 equivalent per year, 1,800 tons of CO2 a year. This is what we've sequestered on average. Based on our output is roughly 1 kilo of CO2 per energy corrected kilo of milk. We sell 2 million litres of milk. And that is 5,700 kilos of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere per hectare per year. And on our system, this is mainly methane, which I don't really believe is actually going up, but that's the data we have. On the left, our organic matter, 2014 to 2022 increased 2.8%, which is 0.36% per year. On the basis of 0.1% organic matter increase in the top 10 centimetres of soil, has an increase of 3,000 kilos of CO2 sequestered. So we've stored 5 tons of CO2 per hectare per year, which takes us to 1,800 tons. So as far as data goes, if our trials are working, I think this is a great example of the results. Cheers.
Thank you, Tom. The scientist and me very excited to see some data. Camilla, would you like to talk to us about your work?
All right. So yeah, I'll be talking to you a little bit about my Nuffield farming journey and a little bit how the programme works. So I've told you some of this background already. The reason that I started looking at growing hemp was on our family farm, probably about 3.5 years ago, thinking about how can we diversify our arable rotation, something that would help with weed control. We had a lot of big blackgrass issues that would improve our resilience, that would be profitable, and that would be low input. We're not organic, we're a reasonably conventional farm, but we have been no-till for a long time, and we have a lot of 6-metre margins around our crops and make space for nature. So we're trying to get a balance, even though we're not perfect at this stage. And as I started looking at growing hemp, I realised that actually there was a real scarcity of information about hemp growing, and particularly people who are doing it in the UK, because there'd been such a big gap in growing it because of prohibition. And that led me to start looking abroad to see what was going on in other countries. I realised that there were other places around the world that were doing a lot more in hemp growing than we were, or even that were just on the same journey of building up their hemp industry. And so that was what inspired me to apply for a Nuffield scholarship to investigate that. And also in the intervening years, we've been growing hemp on our farm. So we started off with 4 hectares in 2021, and then we expanded to 20 hectares last year, and we've grown dual use, seed crops and fibre crops, and tried different varieties and a few different things in terms of post-harvest processing and things like that along the way. So a little bit of background in terms of what the Nuffield Scholarship is all about. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before. Basically, it's a travel scholarship that's designed to facilitate international farmer-led research and knowledge exchange. So you get funding for approximately 8 weeks of travel on your chosen subject. So I chose hemp. How can we kickstart the industry, looking to international opportunity? And then at the end of your travel period, you put together a report which is published online, so it's available for anyone to access. You also have to put together a video, which is on YouTube, summarising your learnings, and also go along to events like this and talk about what you found out, and really try and spread the word as much as you can, so that knowledge is getting to as many farmers as possible. So my journey thus far, for context, I was awarded my scholarship in 2021. The way that it normally works is you get awarded your scholarship in November of that year, and then you have approximately 2 years to do the scholarship. So there's an annual conference in November. You sort of kick off with an international conference in March. Then you have about 1.5 years of travel, and you do your write-up and final wrap-up November, 2 years after you started. But my journey's been a little bit longer because obviously during COVID it wasn't very easy to do a lot of travelling, so I really started in earnest last year. And thus far, I started off with quite a lot of UK travel while I couldn't go abroad, so visiting hemp farmers in Devon, Essex, Yorkshire, went over to Jersey, visited the Jersey Hemp Co. Then in March went to the States, travelled around Colorado, Kansas, Montana, really focusing on processing facilities and different technology for processing hemp, methods for establishing those processing facilities, and also business models for running them, and had a few other little things along the way, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then a couple of months ago, I was lucky enough to travel to Zimbabwe, which wasn't that hemp focused, but it was an opportunity that came up through the Nuffield Scholarship that I thought was just such an amazing opportunity to go and visit a completely different farming system, and saw loads of different farms, visited the Savory Institute and learnt all about their holistic grazing systems, visited lots of other livestock farms, visited crocodile farms, banana farms, tobacco farms, fish farms, conservation projects. So a really fantastic and interesting trip. And so in terms of my hemp travels, just to give you a taster of sort of experimentation and trials that I've seen. Some of the things that we've got here this is Jersey Hemp, who have been looking a lot at the impact of growing hemp on soil health and growing hemp in with cover crops. So this was a split field trial that they were doing with one field with cover cropping and one field without cover cropping, and seeing what the impact of that was in terms of crop growth and also in terms of soil health. This is Nick Vose from East Yorkshire Hemp, who's one of the most established hemp growers in the UK. And killing off hemp with weather, with cold, Zimbabwean medical cannabis. You end up doing fun things like this is a leading cannabis researcher that I met in a bar in Boulder, Colorado. And you also have these amazing unexpected opportunities, like I was driving down through Saguache County in Colorado, and someone said, there's this great holistic grazier that you should meet, which is George from Blue Range Ranch, and went along to him, and his philosophy about working with nature, even though it wasn't directly related to my research, that approach to trying things is the sort of thing that you pick up, which is really beneficial to shaping your overall outlook on farming. Some other tasters of that, this is tea growing in Jersey and black rhino conservation in Zimbabwe. And I suppose the big takeaway about what I've found on my Nuffield journey and for farmer-led research in general is it is all about the people. And people told me this before I started my Nuffield, and I thought, oh, that sounds rather trite and cultish. And sometimes it does feel a little cultish when you're in it, but it is really true. Because I think especially within agriculture, especially if you're in a situation where you're on farm all the time, it can be quite isolating. And so getting the opportunity to go out and see what other farmers are doing, and having the Nuffield network, so this is my year cohort, having that network to actually share ideas and say, this is what I've seen, this is what I've learned, and that cross-pollination from people who are maybe working in completely different fields, sort of like we have here as well, is so valuable and important. And yeah, I guess a final sort of closing note is this is all great, but the other challenge is finding a time. So how does that work? I've been lucky enough to be able to spread out my Nuffield travels. So you've got 8 weeks. Some people take a 2-month sabbatical and do that all in one go. I've been doing that in small chunks. And I guess for any researchers, Becky said that's something that you need to factor in. How are you going to do it? This is actually some photos from some of the data we were collecting for an innovative farmers field trial that we're part of. And as you can see, I left it to the end of the day because other things came up. So the sun is setting and it's virtually dark by the time that I was trying to collect my soil samples. So yeah, hopefully that's about time.
Thank you all so much for that. That was really interesting to hear about your different fields of research and also different structures that you've been part of for farmer-led research. I just want to kind of open the discussion with what have you found to be the benefits of doing your own research, of farmer-led research? And I suppose to a certain extent, why do you think it's important? Like, how important do you think it is that you're kind of leading on your own research? And what are some of the challenges that you've found with doing your own research? Would anyone? Rosie, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, so I guess some of the benefits are just a lot around the practicalities of how easy, also Becky was talking about the design, and a big part with Innovative Farmers is collaborating on that to make sure that it's actually easy to collect the data. And you kind of hear horror stories of machinery being designed that didn't actually fit down the alleyway, or these things that could be really helpful but are then really slow to actually gain some traction. So I think, yeah, really important for people on the ground understanding the practicalities of it and what really matters. And I think the difficulties are, yeah, time is massive, particularly I think we were collecting data during harvest and I drive one of the harvesters. So like how on earth do you do that? And yeah, I think the prioritising is just so important so that you can make sure the objectives are really clear as to kind of what you want to achieve, so you give it enough time.
Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I think for us, because there was quite a low amount of published information for hemp, a big one has been being able to get to people, and maybe also there's some people who are really active online and share a lot about the research that they're doing on their farm and trials that they're doing, but there are also so many farms, in fact probably most farms, who are trying something and they don't necessarily talk about it. They might not even think that it's that revolutionary, and so having an excuse to go to people's farms and get into what they're doing a little bit more has been really amazing. And also questioning some of the accepted knowledge for around things like what is the best time to plant. And I'd been told, well, if you plant after mid-May, you're not going to have a crop. And then actually I got out and spoke to some farmers who said, oh no, don't listen to that. I planted in June before and we got a crop. So that sort of learning is really beneficial.
Yes, to follow on from that, at least in my experience with the Innovative Farmers Programme, is that because most of the time multiple farmers are getting involved in the same project, they're often on different soil types in different regions of the UK. Maybe they have different rotations or grazing patterns and all these kinds of variables, which don't necessarily always come out in maybe more formal academic research, or that means it's harder to necessarily apply that type of research. Whereas because this is insanely practical and tried and tested, and the solutions, then you can kind of tailor them better to your own site. So yeah.
One of the things if someone's doing research, there's probably quite a personal reason. If a company's doing research, why are they doing research? Why are they funding that research? What are they going to get out of it? Is that research actually going to benefit the farmer or the company that's selling the product? And I think that can always be an issue in the dairy industry, where our system, which I believe and I think we can prove is the most sustainable, both profitability, social and environmental, actually doesn't benefit that much of the industry. We don't use huge amounts of consultants. We don't use huge amounts of machinery. We have a dog and stick farming approach. I farm more like my grandfather than my father. We don't have kit. We don't want kit. Kit breaks down. It's expensive. But if I'm not buying kit, who's gonna do my research? So if we want research for farmers, we need to get it from farmers. And you don't know what you don't know, and so until you start learning, how can you need to, if you want an opinion, do some research and have a look, and you'll learn along the way.
Does anyone have any more thoughts on some of the challenges and how you might overcome those?
I think the challenge for us would be support. A lot of the stuff we're doing is new. We can't look for the research papers because they don't exist on what we're trying to achieve. That can be quite challenging, and again, if you don't know, you can't find the answers. So sometimes I think one of the challenges would be actually having enough base knowledge to create a really resilient trial.
Yeah, I think this is, I said about time already in terms of finding the time to do research, but another thing that can be challenging, and maybe if you're working with partners who aren't from within the agricultural industry or funding bodies, is the time it takes to get to a finding, especially if you're looking at something like soil health, or even just to do a replication of growing a crop over a few different seasons, that could be, 3-4 years before you can really have a conclusion. And if you have a really tricky year like this year, where you might have a crop failure, that's almost a write-off, and that's something that I think it can be, is really important to convey to whoever you're working with. And certainly I found very frustrating, having also worked in software. It's like, okay, we've released something and you've got results immediately.
Yeah, just sort of on the same point exactly, because there can just be a drive to get some results, and absolutely by the limitations of funders, soil health changes take a long time, and you can't expect to see a lot happening necessarily, although perhaps your recent research has shown differently. But with soil health, it just sort of one season or something, but it takes such a long time, and funders don't really quite understand that, I don't think, especially when they launch competition that is sort of time bound to X amount of years, and then you've somehow then got to find ideas that fit neatly into that, rather than having been given some flexibility. So we try to be really flexible. Often field labs end up going on for more than the group may have anticipated, but that's okay.
I think also another thing would be about who you're selling to, so who ultimate buyer is and how supportive are they, or often I hear people perhaps don't do as much research because there is just so much pressure for them to deliver X amount at X time for X price, so they kind of are in a system that they've kind of got to know quite well, and they're worried about doing something differently because of the sort of pressures that they're under. So I think there could be a lot more from the buyers to kind of support these. And I think that is coming, but it's still been, I think, quite slow for the support in terms of, regenerative movement or more soil health.
Great, thank you all. I think it struck me what you were saying, Camilla, about how many people are trying things on their farms and don't realise that what they're doing is research, or don't present it as that, not necessarily don't realise. So my next question was about disseminating research, sharing the knowledge that you've gained through your own trials. And I was wondering, through all of your experiences, what you think have found are effective ways of doing that, both in terms of your own learning and your own sharing. And what are kind of effective ways of doing that, or is there anything else we should be doing more of?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we sort of disseminate findings through, like many different ways. I'd probably say that events and workshops have been particularly useful for people to be actually able to discuss and ask very specific questions, and come up with lots of ideas that maybe everyone else hadn't considered before. So I find events very useful, especially for allowing, just giving a space for farmers and growers to pick researchers' brains. I know that, recent groups have definitely said that actually sometimes, in one case they said, actually that was probably the best part of the project, was just being able to get together. So that's great. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from the others, though, because how do you like to learn, really, from other trials?
Oh, wow. I'm sort of so maybe I've got what I want my farm to look like. I probably concentrate. So we farm partnership, me and my wife. I like soil and I like looking at it. And my wife's really good at sharing and sharing and speaking. And I like cows more than I like people, if I'm honest. And I'm quite happy in the countryside. Whereas Sofkan, she's very good at people, understanding people, and how to get stuff across to people. So my advice would be work in a partnership where you have shared abilities on that one.
So I think we're also part of a cluster group, like you said. I think that's a really important one, where we're one of 30 farmers that we kind of share learnings, which is great. I think the open source data, really important. So you can I actually only realised, I think yesterday, that someone else is doing work on sort of cover crops, but they're doing it in hops. So actually there's loads of crossovers with us. And I think, yeah, sort of if I'm a bit nervous about social media because I'm not very good at it, but that's clearly a great way to share successes and stories and encourage others. Like Camilla said, you might not realise that what you're doing is actually could be data that's really helpful to be added to that kind of wider story, whether it's on soil health or whatever your farm is focusing on. So I think, yeah, that would be my tip.
Time for some questions just after we finish this discussion.
Oh, I was just going to add something to it, but I won't.
Something that we have increasingly done as well, we've created part of the website which is all just about more quite in-depth technical articles about specific practices, and we do try and include financial information there about, like, if you were to try this out on your own farm, what would the inputs be, and if there's information on that really comes at the end of the trials on, like, an overall sort of input-output balance, then we'll publish it on there. I'm sure there's something else, but I've completely forgotten based on what you were going to say.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Camilla?
I think that a lot of it's already been said. I guess, like, Twitter's a little bit defunct now for some, but Twitter, Instagram are really great ways of sharing and maybe finding other farmers who are doing similar things. I'm definitely guilty of not sharing enough on Instagram, although I have tried to from my travels. I think the downside to things like that, and even the Farmers Forum, is it's maybe not easy enough to share. You hear a lot about the successes. You don't hear about the things that didn't quite work, and that's a challenge throughout all of research, that if you don't have a result, it doesn't get talked about, and so it's hard to say, well, maybe you shouldn't do it that way, because no one likes talking about things that haven't worked well. And so something that's been really helpful is, you said about farmer groups that are in person, but also things like WhatsApp groups, or that are sort of like a more private forum where you feel like you're in a safe space and you can exchange ideas of what you've been trying, people who you know are also interested in that subject.
Great, thank you all. In sort of also a little bit about disseminating knowledge, but I was just wondering how much kind of interaction you have with in your research with kind of formal academia, and how important or not important you think it is for the results of farmer-led research to make its way into the kind of academic narrative.
I can start. So as part of my Nuffield, I've been doing something that they call an accredited route. So it's also a master's level course. So as well as going out and visiting farmers, I've also been doing a lit review and reading lots of research papers, which has been an amazing resource. And you see a lot of gaps on both sides in terms of, I read pieces of published academic research and I think, why has this not made it through to me or to other farmers or the industry in general? And I also see pieces of academic research that are happening, and it's like, well, that's sort of standard practice. Do we really need to be spending loads of time on doing that piece of research? So I think there's a real gap in terms of communication between those, what's happening on the ground in industry practice and academia, and linking those two together.
Yeah, I mean, I know of some sort of universities and agricultural institutions that do now have roles for, like, knowledge exchange managers or some sort of role like that, where it's often a previous researcher but that has done a lot on the ground, has the responsibility for a lot more of just like, events, connecting, creating articles. So I think it is improving, but you're totally right. There's so much out there. Could we not just do a better job of making that more accessible? I mean, how many people actually sort of want to read a 50-page long report? I mean, something we've just started doing is a 2-page summaries that are just digestible. We can hand them out at events. And if you want to find more, you can read the whole thing if you're interested.
I think two areas where we would have interaction are, one, the Soil Food Web course. That's sort of a lot of research papers have been taken and digested and turned into, for me, readable and digestible knowledge. I dread to think how many papers are involved in that learning, but it takes all of that reading out of it, 4 hours to read a paper and actually digest what you've read, which has been great for me because it puts it in layman's terms. I'm not very good at 8 syllable words. But also with the pilots and the cluster groups, is we generally are being led by an advisor, a consultant or a specialist, where you get a specialist from a field in to talk about their specialist subject, which they've probably gone and done the research first, so you can pick out the bits that you're interested in to then do the research formally on.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have a good relationship with a university or academic body. We have I guess we've got two sort of different things. We have, I think we have, as I said, the UEA doing, I think we've got about 4 master's students and a PhD student, and they can come on our farm, and whatever they're studying, we're really happy for them to carry that out. And I think the data then often is actually really interesting and really relevant, and I perhaps hadn't realised that. So there is coming from that side, I think. And then also, just by working with them, I think for our on-farm trials, it just adds real rigour to what we're doing. And I think as well, yes, I think for me personally, I really like our cluster groups and learning from farmers and like seeing it practically, and I think lots of people are minded that way. But I think if we can get research papers, there is a whole different segment of people that might then learn from that, or there might be something that they're researching that has a link, and it will suddenly kind of build this connection. So I think it is important.
Yeah, and then just from some of the farmers that have been involved in field labs, they've definitely come out after doing 1 or 2 of them, or sometimes they do multiple, with a much better understanding of just how they, even by themselves, could just do a better, more sort of more controlled, more objective trial. So they're just upskilled in understanding, making sure there's a control or there's a treatment, you've replicated it, you're doing randomized sampling, and just understanding all those principles of how to make a trial robust, and then doing what they want really with that knowledge. Yeah.
I feel like there's so many more questions I could ask you, but I'll open it up to the floor first and see if we've got any questions from the audience or from online, and then I'll ask mine at the end of this time. Unfortunately, there's only one mic, so I'm going to pass it around because the people online need people to speak into the mic.
Hi, I'm Sienna and I'm from Oxfordshire. Is it working? Yes. Just thought I'd like to make a comment about sharing research and all that. I come from grape growing background, and I think social media and WhatsApp groups or chat groups are really important because we have an industry-wide one amongst grape growers. It's quite a small industry. And the really nice thing about it is that it's live when people go, look, there's bud burst now, the weather's like this in Dorset, what's it like in East Anglia? And everyone sort of goes, it's like this, we're doing this. Have you thought about that? In the past, this has happened. So that's really, really easy. But what you have to do in my industry is you've got to put all that glamour photography, a beautiful frosty days in the vineyard, which is the selling bit, aside, and just concentrate on the technical. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to have that live conversation.
Rebecca Lawton from Landworkers Alliance, but also Agroecology Research Collaboration. I was just really interested in that last discussion about the connecting with the academic community, and I just wondered what things you think would be helpful for the Agroecology Research Collaboration to do to help connect better with the academic community, and also help the academic community to understand the needs of farmers better, so that the kind of research projects that they're initiating are much more geared towards what's needed. So yes, that's to everyone. Thank you.
It's really interesting. So I actually looked at, could they set up a role that basically would connect farmers with research academics so that you could have this central person that could connect the dots. And I don't think, or definitely in our region, I didn't find that person, but some form of role where you could do that would make, brilliant sense, because there is so much collaboration that could happen.
Do you think it should be regional then? Because then...
It was more, it wouldn't have to be, but I just thought that in terms of the practicalities of, often the students who are coming out to us are coming quite regularly, so they need to be quite close. I mean, it could be that you could work with the grower to collect some of the data, which we have done before. It was just, I think actually the demands on that was I was having to look at mites under a microscope and count them every weekend, and that was just absolutely nuts. But I think if you could, I think that would be really interesting. Or maybe is there a body? Perhaps I don't know. Is there already something that exists?
Yes.
There is. Okay, great. Yeah, perhaps maybe we don't, or the farmers don't know about them enough, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we also help to match farmers with researchers, but I also think that possibly some regional-based people that know everyone best in that area would also be quite useful, actually. Like, we connect with other things like the Farmer Network in Cumbria or the Yorkshire Agricultural Society, who, understand the networks there much better than we do to try. But yeah, I still find it tricky, and it would be nice to have a simpler way.
Yeah, and maybe it's the facilitators of the cluster groups, because there's often farmers. We've got one. He's been doing no-till for 25 years, but Colin doesn't really have a mobile phone, so his farm is so interesting. But how on earth anyone would ever find him? So I think there has to be some connection in that way, where I think they'd be really happy to be involved and happy to share learnings, but that you would need someone, I think, to help facilitate that in some cases.
Within the dairy industry, pretty much all the milk buyers have got their own research projects. So I think to make the link a bit easier, if the researchers were to work with the buyers or the co-ops, that would push them to the actual individual farmers doing the research that they were interested in, might be a good stepping stone.
It sort of depends on the size. We worked really closely with the hop sector on a few field labs now, and they seem to really like innovative farmers. But so almost going back to your question about dissemination of knowledge, it's so easy because there are, it's about around 60 hop growers in the UK. They're really consolidated. The agronomist is usually or always Hutchinson's, and and they often end up project managing or coordinating the research projects. So they have an insane amount of closeness, and they're sharing information all the time. So that makes it really easy. It's a lot harder when it's a larger sector.
Yeah, I think I would just say about certainly one of the things we're trying to do with the agroecology research collaboration is form that link between farmers and academic researchers. We're still quite new and don't have a huge amount of resources, so how much we can actually do that in practice at the moment is maybe unclear, but I certainly do a lot of talking to postgraduate students and trying to match them up with projects and with farmers who might be interested in similar things to them. So it's certainly something we want to do more of in future, so it's good to hear that would be useful.
My name's Tom. I had a question around, it's come up a few times that potentially doing trials can lead to kind of extra burdens on farmers or additional requirements to collect this or that, and also the challenge of kind of time, and it takes a long time for results to come through. Do any of the panel is there anything we can do with kind of the information that farmers already collect? There's lots of information that just gets racked up on farm in the ordinary course. Can we just do more with that, or going back to all the records going back over years and just do research on what's already there, rather than asking farmers to start measuring this and everything taking years and having to run lots of expensive or complicated trials? Can we just work with everything they've tried in the past?
Can I go first on this one? with our field lab trial, and I don't know what Becky's experience is, but I know with us, if it's complicated or it's hard work or you've got to do lots of extra things, it doesn't get done. And to the point on one of our pilot schemes, they asked the farmers to go and take soil samples and do the ecosystem processes themselves, and they just didn't do it. So they ended up bringing in someone else. They brought in an outside body because they wanted everyone needed to do it at a set time, but people are busy, so it didn't work. So what we did with our trial was all the data collection the farmer was already collecting. So what I think it was my second slide was a picture of AgriNet. AgriNet is a grass measuring software that every grass-based dairy farmer I know is already using, and they've actually stored on that is up to 10 years, say, of grass data, grass measurements, reseeding, fertilizer applications, soil structures, and then with Arla, we have our milk collection for the last 5 years on the computer. So every data point I need for my trial is pretty well already being collected. So when we go and graze our field, we put that in AgriNet. When the milk's collected, we get a milk ticket and it gets put online, so I can link directly how much grass I grew because I've measured it and doing it anyway. When the cows went in that field, I know that's on AgriNet, and how much milk was produced on that day, I know it's on Arla. So there is, I think you're right, there is ways, and we can design these trials to just use data.
I think it also, though, depends. Our farm, we don't really have much data at all apart from what the tonnage was, and I actually, in terms of us looking at kind of soil and microbiology, I think ours is probably the first farm that's looked at that. So there probably is some lessons, I think, and maybe that is a place particularly we should look at with some of the growers. But I think possibly they were looking at different questions then, and it's slightly different focus. So I don't know how much there is perhaps from that. I'm sure that there's lots normally of storage of, I don't know, someone that's worked there for 50 years that will have all of these things that they've seen but perhaps not known why. And I think having those conversations and understanding the sort of heritage and history of the farm is really important. But I don't know in terms of data collection, or definitely not with us, we wouldn't have that much, I don't think.
There was a project that the Soil Association was running called Carbon Assets for Soil Health, which it was all about just trying to link soil organic carbon to management practices. And so a colleague that ran it first asked for just historical data, so to find out if anyone already had some data on their soil organic carbon, and collected that. But then if not, they sent out a sampling kit for people to do their own samples, send it back to NRM for analysis. But I guess the risk in that is that you have no almost quality control over that data. So, did people follow? It's very unlikely that everyone followed the same sort of protocols, or were they sampling to exactly the same depth and that sort of thing. So that's where it becomes a bit tricky.
Yeah, I guess on that question of using historic data versus having to collect new things, it depends a bit on what your goal is. If you're wanting to trial a new process or maybe answer a specific question, then there's a lot more rigor that you need around that data to see, is this really working? Is it the change that I'm making that's changed my results versus maybe something else? But I think there's a huge amount of potential within historic data, using things like potentially machine learning to pick up trends if you are able to aggregate a huge amount of agricultural data to look at maybe quite top level things like variety trials would be an interesting example of this, where you normally have your recommended list, which is based off quite a limited number of farm trial sites, which try to cover as much in terms of climatic and soil factors as they can, but there's only so much you can do in terms of doing those variety trials. Whereas actually if you could take the farm recorded data across varieties for a particular crop and information about their soil and some basic management that they'd be collecting anyway, that could be a really interesting and powerful tool to pick up how have they performed in different situations with different management.
Thanks. So it's, I guess a question to the panel, but also to potentially some others in the room. Yeah, so my work is sort of working directly with farmers and farmers that are sort of like transitioning. And I think that there's perhaps a challenge with the way that a lot of research is, or projects are kind of conceived or designed, that it's, you know, essentially a documenting exercise, you know, trying to like sort of document best practice and then disseminate it. But there's actually, to me, I kind of work with the sort of the producers themselves, and there's fundamentally sort of a competency issue, if you like, and that perhaps the focus for me needs to be around sort of experimentation, basically, and the ability to actually sort of like develop best practice and to master practices, and that mastery process takes a while, basically, and it seems hard to actually sort of want to actually document it whilst you're actually in the process of trying to learn something, trying to actually implement it in place, basically. So it'd be interesting to know what people from the panel, maybe other people that are involved in sort of embedded research, what they think on that topic.
I'm going to go first, even though we've probably talked about this quite a lot in the pub together. I think one of the challenges is always going to be that the reason the research we're doing is all new. So there isn't necessarily going to be out there anyone that knows. So, say my topic is how do you regenerate a Dorset Devon border organic dairy farm? I'd like to think actually as a Dorset Devon border dairy farmer, I'm as specialist as it gets in doing that data collection or doing those experiments. I might not have the scientific knowledge, but I do understand the farm, I do understand the project, and I think there's a lot of power in that. I understand that turning that into a formal written paper could be a challenge for me, which is probably where we need to be linking. But I think that there definitely needs to be the involvement of the man on the ground. If not running, having a real key input, because without that data, without that input, it's probably not going to be that relevant.
Well, thank you. It's a comment really rather than a question, though that might come out as a question. I think Niels is quite right about protocols and ensuring that protocols are done. It's one thing I do like about Innovate and your field labs is that you do try to make sure that things are well protocoled, because I see quite often groups, quite loose groups, who try things but actually they all do things slightly differently because that's how it works at home, or how they think it works, or that's the last bit of information they heard from somebody, perhaps on social media or wherever. So I think we just have to be cautious about making sure we've got protocols and we understand what they are. But I'm really interested in this dissemination thing, and I facilitate a cluster group for myself on the Wiltshire Downs, and I'm also a member of the Understory Lays group. So I'm quite involved in this. I think face-to-face is really important at some stage, but these WhatsApp groups, have them all over the place. Some of them they're very useful, but that's sort of a feedback comment rather than anything else.
Hi, yeah, it's a question from Viola, who's joining online. They say, I'm someone who has absolutely no personal background in agriculture or farming, being from London, but I have a real interest in the food system. I often wonder how I may contribute or carry out research that doesn't just take up space, that could be more valuably used by somebody actually in farming. What advice might the panellists have on how best to approach my research, or whether I should at all?
We have a complete open gate policy. If anyone wants to get in contact and come see us because they think that their research, they might want to do some research on our farm or just educate themselves slightly on what that farming system looks like, come on down just to get in contact. We'd love to have you.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
If a person is in London, actually, what you were saying about reading papers, sorry. So if a person basically asking the question lives in London and actually doesn't have any contact with real life farms, I completely agree with you, Tom. Come to the farm if they can, but quite often they'll have some spare time just to sit on Google Scholar and take those papers that you were mentioning. That there's this disconnect between academia and real life. That's the sort of person that you might want to do some meta-analysis on that. That's just a comment on that.
Hi, Lisa. I was just going to say there is an issue between science and farmers experimenting, because science often needs different things to what a farmer needs, and that can cause issues, and so that's something that definitely needs to be resolved with the farmers. But it's not to say that science is right and farming is wrong. In fact, I think science is often far too restrictive and needs to try and bend itself a bit so that we can accommodate reality, because we need real farmers doing real things. I did just want to ask the question, you said, can't we do a better job of making papers more accessible? Tell me where, please, and what?
We'll just maybe start with if there's any more responses to Viola's question, and then move on to the accessibility.
I did have a thought, but now I realise if she's in London it might be difficult. But in some field labs, occasionally they might be linked with like groups that are just keen bird watchers that are happy to help out and collect some data, and the coordinator of that field lab, that project, would usually arrange people to come out and do that kind of thing. Yeah, sorry, that's all I was going to say. In terms of Lisa's question, it's really tricky, isn't it? There are so many platforms. There are so many platforms that have been created all to try and solve the same problem, saying we need one central place where like all the information, like, and all the guidance and everything that could be useful for everyone, for researchers, for advisors, for farmers and growers, for the industry, where it all needs to be placed. And so a number of these have been created. And are they all as useful as each other? No, not necessarily. One that recently has seemed to gain quite a lot of traction and does seem to have quite a lot of people signing up to it, however, it's called FarmPEP, which is it stands for Performance Enhancement Platform, and people can create profiles in there and share with the community under different topics, various different topics. Lots of information. So that is a recent one that's been created, but it's a really tricky one.
I guess maybe a little bit on both of these in terms of like ways to start. We've spoken about social media as a method of knowledge dissemination, but that could be a good way to sort of understanding where are some of the challenges that farmers are facing and how are they doing things on farms, and maybe meet some, if you're the kind of farmer who's posting what you're doing on Instagram or on TikTok, then you're probably the kind of farmer who will quite happily welcome questions about your farm or maybe a visit. Like, we're only an hour from the train from London, so it would be very easy to visit if you wanted to. Sorry, I've forgotten what my other point was going to be about about research, but I think social media could be a really good starting point for finding opportunities for research and questions.
I'd also, definitely tell her not to give up, because, we need different perspectives, and I'm sure, we need people looking at things from different angles, and I'm sure she would ask questions that perhaps we don't think of, or ways that we talk that, is misunderstood or needs more clarification, where we just assume that it's known. And so I think it's really important to have people looking at it from different angles. So,
Yeah, and I think if people who aren't themselves involved in farming or growing, but are really serious about taking part in you know, doing research in that area, then that's certainly something that we would like to help facilitate at the Agroecology Research Collaboration, you know, in terms of making the link with people who are farming and growing and do know what the specific needs are, and just, yeah, as long as those connections are there, I think that there's definitely a lot that lots of different people can do. I think there's one there.
Thanks very much. I've had lots of various questions occurring to me as we've been going along, but the one that I just thought of, listening to you talking, it seems that when you actually meet farmers and you're talking to them, you know, you get a lot of information that you're not getting just from the number data. And I work on the interface between nutrition and agriculture, mostly in the global south. And my work, a lot of it now, is qualitative. So interviewing a lot of people, you know, you can do that quite quickly and get a lot of information, which is the sort of information that you get from talking to people rather than getting all the numbers. So I'm wondering to what extent you're doing that sort of research, which, you know, sort of uses the conversations and all the extra layers of information that you can get from talking to people.
Yeah, we have, so with our environment project, we do have the Nature Conservancy are kind of documenting the journey, like the difficult questions that arise from different priorities within the different farms, or the fact that we have Anglian Water and as one of the partners who's part of the problem with the water issue, but also part of the solution. So how do we, with environmental NGOs, have those discussions? What does that look like? And I think that is actually a really important part. And they want to write a sort of how-to guide that if you're looking to do nature recovery or landscape scale, how would you begin that? What are the, yeah. And so I think that is really important. We also, with our cluster group, have a social scientist that attends all of the meetings, and she documents a lot about, yeah, our conversations that we have, and yeah, the different connections that are sometimes made that, yeah, I think you're right, would be missed just within data. So I think it is really important.
Everything in the research I'm doing at the moment is conversation-based, really, so that's very much the approach that I'm following. Something that occurred to me as you were saying that around qualitative research and knowledge sharing more broadly is having someone that, as a farmer, you trust to speak to. Sometimes a very structured, formal feeling interview doesn't get the best results, and something that I definitely find is often we learn a lot from things like machinery dealers visiting, because what always happens is, you know, they've got a bit of kit to sell, but they'll also come to the field, and as we're walking around, they'll say, oh, so what have you been doing in this field? And then they'll say, oh yeah, there's another guy who I also sold a drill to, and they're doing this. And so you have this informal exchange of knowledge as well that happens. So through a sort of central point.
We're coming up to 12:30, so I think that's probably all we've got time for right now. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank our panellists. Thanks so much for sharing your research and your perspectives. And if anyone is interested in finding out more, getting more involved with the Agroecology Research Collaboration from a research academic perspective, or from a farmer-grower perspective, or really any perspective, feel free to come and chat to me at any point during the conference, but also my email's on the Landworkers Alliance website. Cool. Thank you all.
Thank you.